In this session, we're going to shift gears to the policies that shape how innovations are built and scaled as well as governed. But can compliance be more than just a regulatory checkbox, or can it actually fuel innovation instead of slowing it down? So joining us to unpack this very crucial conversation, we have two leaders who sit at the intersection of technology, policy, and business. Please, let's welcome onto our stage Bernard Gavgani as Group CIO of BNP Paribas. He oversees the digital transformation of one of the world's largest banking institutions. Also being joined by the co-executive director of AI Now Institute. She has advised regulators, shaped AI policies at Mozilla, and served as a senior advisor on AI at the US Federal Trade Commission. Please, let's welcome Amba. Please, let's give both of them a very, very big round of applause as they come and join us.
Good morning.
Good morning. I don't know how we can top the last session on synthetic biology and the future of the universe, but we'll try.
It was fascinating. I was very impressed by the quality of the explanation. And also, since yesterday, we have had many interesting sessions, the different topics. And also, we have another session, which is ours, which will create or give you the vision of the innovation in the large organizations, regulated organizations such as banks, and all of the policies that we have to follow. So maybe I can start by explaining a little bit for the audience the BNP Paribas, what BNP Paribas is, how we are operating, the diversity of our organization, and also the complexity of the environment and regulations, and the challenge that we have for innovation. BNP Paribas is the first European Eurozone bank, international player. We are operating in 63 countries. We are around 180 3,000 people. The bank is organized in different poles. We have the International Investment Bank, which we call is CIB, worldwide, international part of our activity. We have also the Protection Investment Services, which basically is the insurance and asset management and private bank. And also we have what we call is the retail bank, operating in the locally in the different area. So this is the way that we are organized, and it shows the diversity and the maturity of this our organization doing and innovating in this environment. So in 2022, we launched our new initiative about the transformation of the bank, which was called the GTS. Growth, technology, and sustainability. And for the technology, we put in the middle and as a heart of our evolution. And the idea was to create all of the enablers that we need to accelerate the innovation for the future. 3 examples I give you. The first one was the cloud that we put in place. We launched our own initiatives, always related to the constraint of regulations. The second one was the data. We will come back to this one also, which basically, this is the banking industry, and data is the most important part of our know-how and our asset. And the last was AI, which was also something that we wanted to accelerate and get the full platform. So we have launched the different initiatives around the AI. And I have to tell that we are using the open source AI We are one of the main partner of Mistral, our French champion of AI. We are using the small LMM in a different area. And also we use something which we can also continue to talk about is Copilot, but a very limited number, because what we do is we are experimenting, learning, and ensuring that what we are building are sustainable in the future. Well, what do you think are the way that we are operating?
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I think it'll also be interesting to see how our different vantage points interplay, because you're dealing with a very grounded, concrete example of AI use cases in the banking sector. Just to give a little bit of context to the audience, I run a think tank that's based in New York City. We've been around since 2016, and we were started with the premise that there was a need for more grounded research on the social, political, and economic impacts of AI technologies, which already in 2016, this is almost 10 years ago now, it was very clear that this was going to be a highly sort of transformative but potentially disruptive technology, and one that really required an industry-independent research voice. And so, we come at this a little bit. Firstly, I think it always surprises people that AI now started in 2016, because everyone now thinks that AI started in 2023 with ChatGPT. We have to remind people it goes way back, the tech goes way back, but so does the regulatory thinking around what to do with this tech. So, I think just to respond to what you just said, I think it's quite interesting as an organization that's looking at macro level trends. Already your telling of how your bank is thinking or using AI, it stands a little bit apart from the industry chatter, because it seems like you're in a highly regulated, a highly mature industry from a regulatory point of view, which is almost at odds or in tension with the fact that the AI market is in some ways the Wild West, right? Everyone is talking about regulation as a rate limiter. We don't need regulation. This is the laissez-faire, hands-off. But it's interesting when people come, or industry leaders come from highly regulated sectors, where it's quite obvious that, of course, you need to have some limitations or constraints to make sure that the fundamentals are in order. And regulation is not, therefore, a barrier to innovation. It is simply setting the terms on which innovation will happen. So already I think it's really interesting to hear from you. One other thing I will say just at the outset is, she mentioned that our organization and I spent some time at the Federal Trade Commission advising on AI-related enforcement and policy issues. One of the things we did early in our time is we published a kind of controversial blog on the FTC website. It was called AI is a Marketing Term. And everyone went crazy. They were like, the US federal regulator is saying what? And the idea was really to say that there is so many sort of unverified claims going on in this space, because it's the honeypot, there's capital flowing. And so people are sort of making, they're claiming their technologies are AI when arguably they really aren't, or they're definitely not meeting that threshold. But maybe more insidiously, they are claiming that AI can be a solution to problems that it really can't be. And I think that part of what our research has endeavored to do, the fact that we are industry independent in the midst of a very intense hype cycle, is to really ask those first principles questions, which is, if the claim that AI is, if the kind of value proposition is that AI is going to bring a productivity revolution, our counterclaim is that the answer to that question is really, it depends. Whether or not AI will lead to productivity gains really depends on a few different things, or a long list, but to mention a few, it really depends on the quality of data, and we can talk a little bit about that in your context too. High quality data really matters, but also, I'm sure over yesterday and the next few sessions, you're going to hear a lot about AI agents and automating workflows. What people don't realize is that the world, and especially the world of work, is very, very messy, data about the world is very, very messy. And just by putting AI on top doesn't get rid of that messiness, right? It glosses over that messiness. And sometimes that will be at odds with, it will sort of, a barrier to AI actually bringing those productivity gains will be the extent to which your workforce or your workflows were AI ready to begin with. And so I think there are certain, people ask, what does regulation have to do with these business value proposition questions? I actually think it has everything to do with it, because in the US, we've been pushing for baseline standards of accuracy, security, privacy that we feel provides the necessary hygiene so that people are asking that question of not just, let's create problems so that AI can solve them, but let's really think about where AI can provide value and make sure that we're doing so with fundamentals in place and not just kind of running on a hype cycle. And both the demand side and the supply side are really pushing right now. So it's a time to push for the fundamentals being in place. And maybe that's a good moment to segue to you to ask, like, practically, how are you dealing with those questions of when AI is an appropriate use case? Are you also coming up front with challenges as you're doing so?
No, absolutely. This is a big challenge also for us. I give you a few examples. So we experiment AI in different areas. So we are using the chatbot and AI for the improvement of experience of our clients. We can come back to this one because, again, it is absolutely key to ensure that at the end of the day, we bring the added value to our customers. We use also for internal controls, for the risk, and also the setup of the way that we are operating inside of the company to bring the added value to ourselves and to, at the end, to our customers. And we also use for the security as cyber and cybersecurity. So the AI is used for monitoring all of our system end to end. Because again, so all AI is also, you have to be careful with the way that we use AI to create the value of the bank, at the same time avoid to create the problems. And the last thing I have to say is that AI for IT, which is the most important part, that I am sure that most of these audience, you know that you need to have the strong AI engine is set up with all of the infrastructure which goes around. For instance, having the right infrastructure to build and to operate around AI, having the framework of control around the AI. But you said one thing which is quite important, is productivity, but people, they think that AI will solve all of the problems. I think that if we don't think from the beginning about the redesigning the process, redesigning the organization from scratch, we cannot improve. One thing is true, that AI is going deeply change the way that we do today the business. So this is absolutely key for the large organization, specifically for large organization, to think about what would be operating model in the future. The only under this condition we can get the productivity in sustainable way.
Yeah, I just want to echo again what I said. The tone with which you're approaching AI is really, in some ways, it's a radical thing to say, let's be thoughtful about this and think about what problems it can solve, because we're in the middle of every CEO is like, we need an AI strategy now, and there's just so much headwinds towards, finding AI-shaped holes to fill. So I think taking a more measured and a more reasonable approach is in the long term going to be the right bet. But I think just because right now is a moment where everyone's talking about regulation. Certainly at our organization, we've been thinking about it for a long time. One of the things that we've been saying for a long time is there's no AI exception to the laws on the books. Just because you're using AI doesn't mean that you suddenly get a get out of jail free card. And the other thing that we have to remind people, because everyone asks the question, should we have AI regulation? And my answer is always, we already do. Because if you're looking for the word AI in a regulation, then you're maybe asking the wrong question. But if you think of AI as a sort of supply chain that has many composite parts, whether that's data, compute, or talent, each of these sort of inputs are already regulated in their own way, right? So before the Senate subcommittee last year in the US, I testified, and the title of my testimony was Data Privacy Regulation is AI Regulation. And in many ways, whether it's competition, whether it's privacy, whether it's security, whether it's baseline free speech questions, many of these are already copyright, these are already highly regulated components, and the question is, how do they adapt and how are they enforced in the AI era? At the same time, this is a really tricky time to be having any conversation about regulation. As some of you may have noticed in the news, we had a major election somewhere in the world recently, and in the US, I think it's almost as if there is now a collective amnesia about the fact that the tech industry is regulated and has been for a very long time. And the banner, we were both in France, Bernard, a couple of weeks ago, and there was so much tension with the fact that, the US with Vice President Vance at the helm, his speech was very much, it better be hands-off from Europe, right? Don't touch this space. Regulation is suddenly a dirty word. I can say this because it was on record, there were several members of the European Parliament who were almost apologizing for the decade of regulation that preceded it. And it became like regulation had become a scapegoat for the lack of national competitiveness, which I think is a really unhealthy dynamic. So the idea like, sorry, the reason that Europe wasn't innovating is because we were regulating. And I think that's a really false binary. Of course, there might be some genuine questions about how to simplify regulation and make sure that it doesn't act as a constraint for smaller businesses. But this caricature of regulation as being some burdensome bureaucracy, I think is really outdated, and we're at a danger or an inflection point right now where that might take over. I think it's also, bigger picture, if we can zoom out a little bit, I think it's also, just by saying the word innovation, I don't think that the tech industry should assume that everyone will back off, because I think there's a more important question, which is, what is the right kind of innovation, right? There are many parents, I'm sure, in the audience, or even actually any of us adults, do we think that infinite scroll or the targeted advertising that was hyper-personalized long-term, do we think that was the right kind of innovation? What are the kind of social and economic impacts it has unleashed that maybe we can't walk back on, whether that's children or teens' mental health or so many other kind of social problems. So I do think that this is a really important time for us to remember that technology isn't just its own train that's running along and we just have to watch it come, but governments, the public really have a say in shaping what kind of innovation we see and how it transpires.
When we are operating in 63 countries, as I said, so we have 63 different regulations that we have to respect. As a CIO of the large group as BNP Paribas, you see the challenge that I have to define the strategy of innovation, be able to operate worldwide. So this is one of the, to give you an example, we have more than 100 regulations in Europe, only in Europe. So you see that, but when you look at most of those regulations, you see that most of them are targeting the same thing. So this is the common area that we have to find when we design our future systems to ensure that we are respecting all these parts. I have to say that our commitment to our client is protecting their data. And this is non-negotiable, this one. And we need to continue to reinforce this part. If I come back to the US, but in US, it is not really the regulation as it is defined in Europe. Is much more they try to find the principles that can be, which can be or should be respected. If you look at in China, they have also the very strong transparency, auditability of regulation they have put in place. And you have also the UNESCO, for instance, have also defined some principles to ensure that, again, that we are in the right frame. I have to say that we shouldn't complain about regulation. We have to understand that the regulation is absolutely necessity for doing the things in the right way. So this is the way that we operate with regulations. We talk very quite usual with them. We try to learn from each one. We try to understand from each one what is feasible, what is difficult for us, for regulators, and also understand their mindset. And this is the only way that we can improve our setup. The banking industry is so regulated that we cannot do or guess that what we do by default are the right one if we don't collaborate with our regulators and ensure that we are aligned together.
So I'll tell you an interesting anecdote because I was just reminded by the point on banking regulation, which is that last year the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC chair, Gary Gensler, he said that the fact that foundation models like GPT and ChatGPT and these other foundation models, the fact that they could potentially be undergirding, 2 or 3 models would be the foundation for large swaths of the economy and society, was itself a systemic risk vector. And that term systemic risk really comes from the banking and financial system space, which is the idea that if you have certain technologies that sit under or sit as the foundation of a lot of innovation that happens on the top layers, any errors that creep in at the bottom layer, whether those are errors or discrepancies when it comes to cybersecurity, but also kind of accuracy or bias or representational issues, those issues or those concerns are simply going to be diffused economy-wide, right? And the source of those concerns are not going to be found at the application layer. They're going to be only solvable at the foundation layer, which I think is we've been at AI Now, we've been sort of recommending a supply chain approach to regulation, and the big tech companies will tell you that you only regulate at the use case, you don't regulate the foundation layers, but we think that it isn't an either or. You need to regulate throughout the supply chain because there are certain problems that can only be solved at the base layer, and there are certain problems which obviously only make sense in the context in which they're operating, right? Healthcare AI is going to have very, very different implications from banking, from facial recognition in the airport, from social media in a social media algorithm. So the fact that we're using the term AI for such vastly different systems means that obviously there's going to be certain amount of regulatory decisions that can only be made at that end use case. But there is also room for certain foundational rules of the road, and we've been pushing in that direction. We only have a couple of minutes, so I'll close us off with my 3 takeaways, and I'll hand it to you for the last word after that. So yeah, I mean, I think this was a really interesting conversation. The 3 things that are sort of top of mind for me, one is I think it's been great to hear from an industry leader that regulation is almost matter of fact. It's not, it's nothing exceptional. Regulation is not the antithesis for innovation. So one takeaway is I think these binaries are very outdated. We need to do away with them. The second piece of this, and if you're around for my masterclass class later, I'll be talking more about this, is that the nature of regulation itself is changing. It's not just about regulation in the traditional sense of setting guardrails. We're also seeing what we refer to as industrial policy or economic policy, where governments are setting forward policies that are meant to accelerate their national industries. That could be anything from permitting for land use for data centers so that you can build data centers. It could be talent programs, to boost national competitiveness. It could be public procurement programs where the government is guaranteeing that they will act as buyer, right? So we're seeing a whole new era of, industrial policy as regulation, which is super interesting. And I guess maybe the final point, because this was about kind of what is the next era of regulation, is who's going to claim global leadership. And I think this is an interesting conversation to be having in India, because next year it was the UK, then it was France, and now it's going to be India that's helming the next AI summit, and I think it will be a really important moment to set the tone, just like President Macron set a tone for public interest AI at the last summit. I think it will be important to go against the grain of the deregulatory headwinds and make it very clear that regulation and industrial policy can set the foundations for the next era of technology and really set the tone in a positive way.
So our challenge is having the vision and anticipate the future, as it has been said. This is the only way that we can win in this very complex transformation of our setup. Is one book I can suggest that if someone wants to not to sleep and read interesting thing is AI or Die. I think it's a very interesting book which shows that AI is absolutely something that we have to adapt, and if we don't do it, we will die. And to avoid the die, we have to anticipate.
Okay, on that note, while you're reading AI or Die, please also read a book by Arvind Narayanan and Sayash Kapoor called AI Snake Oil. It's about how many of the claims in this industry are false and self-serving. But I'm only saying that because it's a good antidote to the more existential dread claims. Thank you so much.
Thank you.